Ladies and gentlemen, after that very inspirational speech from Rina, our next speaker is actually the founder and director of Oprah Consulting Group that works with businesses to help recruit, develop, and retain high-performing staff through customized HR solutions, HR analytics, and psychology. Ladies and gentlemen, presenting the topic on overcoming barriers to employment, put your hands together for Dr. Paul Engren. Dr. Paul, please.
What a hard act to follow. That was incredibly inspirational. The one thing that was left out of that bio is that my PhD is in unemployment. So I did all of my work in the study of trying to predict unemployment and also what were the things that helped in terms of working through those periods and getting back into the workforce. And that's why I'm here today, and it's a real privilege to be here. This has been my passion for probably 30 years now, and to be sharing some of that work with you guys is a true privilege. So I want to begin where it all started for me, and that was back in 1997. And what I was asked to do was to model for the government predictors of unemployment. And the reason that I was asked to do this was in New Zealand, you become eligible for certain payments depending on the length of time you're unemployed. And so if the government could predict early on how long someone was going to remain unemployed, they could intervene early. So the idea was, can we predict whether someone's going to be unemployed, whether someone's going to remain unemployed, and can we use that to then help in terms of the way that we model what the labour force is going to look like in the future? Now, that was the mandate that I had. And I was working with some of the best statisticians at the time, best actuarial people. I had exposure to stuff that was happening globally. How well do you think that we could do in terms of predicting whether someone was going to remain unemployed or become unemployed? You're saying no? You're absolutely right. It was really, really difficult. Difficult to the point where it cannot be done. All of us have our own individual stories as to why we were here. And as part of that process, I got the government to rethink the way that we approach these problems. So it was no longer about merely the prediction of whether someone was going to be unemployed or remain unemployed, but it was about what type of assistance can we provide. Because if we can provide the right type of assistance and learn from the process of trying to predict unemployment, then we can have the right sort of interventions. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. I want to talk to you about what we uncovered in terms of 3 key areas that relate to why people remain out of work, and give you a couple of things that will help in terms of getting back into work. I also want to leave enough time to answer your questions. So I've worked in this field now for, as I said, since the 90s, studied in the field before that, and so I do want to use this as a platform for you to ask a lot of questions. Yeah? So let's begin with the model. The framework to why people remain unemployed is down to 3 areas. And the way that we remember this is an acronym called COW. The C is one's capacity. And I'll talk about that very shortly, what we mean with that. The second one is hugely important. That's the opportunity. That's the labour market. That's the stuff that Karen's going to talk to you about. What is the labour market doing? And that's why prediction became so difficult, because often it's not the individual, it's the labour market. And so having an understanding of the labour market and how the labour market's working is a really important point. I think sometimes job seekers focus very much on themselves, which is great. But sometimes it's got little to do with the job seeker, and it's got a lot to do with the opportunities that are out there. So having an understanding of what those opportunities are is very important. And the third area is willingness. What is your willingness to take on different types of roles, to put yourself in positions which may be uncomfortable as stepping stones towards work? So the acronym to remember with respect to why people are unemployed is 3 things. COW. Capacity, opportunity, and willingness. And so any sort of diagnostics that you're going to do, any frameworks that you're going to use to help you in your thinking can be framed as one of these 3 things. Is it a capacity issue? Is it some skills that I need? Is it an area where I don't have the right skills for the jobs that I'm looking for? Is it an opportunity issue? I.e., is it the labour market? Has the labour market shifted such that those jobs aren't there? Thirdly, is it a willingness issue? Now, under capacity, people tend to think of things like skills and knowledge and those sorts of things. But confidence is a huge predictor. One of the last talk was incredibly inspirational. And one of the things that I took from that talk was that self-belief. That belief that I could overcome anything. It's what I very much heard in that talk. And self-belief is a huge part of predicting whether someone remains out of work for a long period of time or finds work. When we were doing the modeling that I was talking to you about before, I was able to build incredibly sophisticated models to try to ascertain how long someone was going to remain unemployed, so on and so forth. Do you know what was the one most predictive question? Anyone want to have a stab? One question. If you were going to ask somebody one question, what would be the best one to ask? You'll kick yourself when I tell you. No? What did you say, Karen? Yeah, turn that on its head a little bit. Go in reverse. Yeah, getting close, getting close. The biggest predictor was how long do you think you're going to remain unemployed? That one question accounted for most of the variability in how long people remained unemployed, which is very interesting because that was independent of their skills, independent of the jobs they were going for. It was that belief. Now, that's not just me talking as a psychologist. That's talking as somebody who's had to model the stuff. You know, one of the things that we were doing was we were pitching the models that we were creating against the advisors' work. And we were able to use these types of messages to begin to understand the type of messages, for those of you that are working with job seekers, the type of messages that we need to be getting out there. Because self-belief is a huge part of capability. And I think we focus very much on skills and knowledge and all these tangible things. But sometimes we miss the forest for the trees. And that self-belief is hugely predictive. So if there's one takeaway point from capacity that I want you to think about, it is that self-belief. And I know that that self-belief is hard. It's hard to continue to tell yourself that I will find work if you are looking. And for those of you that are working with job seekers, it's hard to continually reinforce that. But that message is just hugely important. The second area is opportunity. And when I was asked to do this modeling, the focus was very much on the individual. But the more that I modeled, the more that the labour market was a massive part of this issue. How long someone remains unemployed had a lot to do with the labour market. Remember that I'm originally doing this work in New Zealand. I ended up doing it in Australia and Canada and other places, other governments took me to other places to do the stuff. In New Zealand, there's different areas that it's a little bit bigger than Singapore, just a smidgen. And it means that there were areas that you could be in where there just weren't the jobs. And the same rules apply even more so today. We now live in a time which is known as VUCA. And this is another little acronym that I want to give you, which is this idea that the world that we live in is very volatile, it is uncertain, it is complex, and it is ambiguous. No one really knows what's going on. Anyone who tells you that they know exactly what's going on is kidding you. I work with some of the biggest brains globally, and they don't know what's going on. Economists don't know what's going on. Politicians don't know what's going on. No one knows how this whole thing ends up. So they are what we call VUCA times. So understanding the labour market is vital. And having skills that are transferable, having skills like learning agility, the capacity to learn, the willingness to learn, to not box yourself into a particular career. You know, if I had ever thought that I'd be standing here in Singapore doing this 20 years ago, it just wasn't on the radar. You simply can't box yourself in. You have to, just as I've had to, go where the work is. But it's taking, the whole thing with opportunity is understanding that labour market and understanding that it's about these transferable skills. One of the key ones is this learning agility, this ability to pick up new problems. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later on. The third is willingness. And willingness has lots of components. Am I willing to relocate, as I've spoken about? What type of salary am I prepared to accept? Am I willing to work outside of my chosen field? Now, I'm not here to force you to take on anything or do anything, but this is a diagnostic framework that you can use for yourself. Is my issue a capacity issue, a willingness issue, or an opportunity issue? We all have areas of this. You know, for all of us, there's things we will do and won't do. Understanding that is key. So in terms of having a good diagnostic, what I'm wanting to leave you with respect to this section is this idea of COW. What is my capacity? And capacity includes confidence. Opportunity. How well do I know the labour market? Where can I get information on the labour market? How well do I know what openings are there? It's great seeing the range of speakers, the different types of speakers that they've organised today as I look on that board. And having people involved in recruitment who are able to talk about the labour market is very valuable. And thirdly, willingness. What am I willing to do? Okay, so where does that leave us? That leaves us to an area of what they call needs-based assessment. So we need to look at every individual and they'll have different needs. Everyone has different needs with respect to what they need to help them get through this period. For those that work in this field, this means that and I'm addressing now those that work in this field, that means that any feedback must be targeted. It must be targeted to the individual. It can't be vanilla. For those of you that work in this field, it's vital that you take a needs-based approach. And you have a framework such as capacity, willingness, and opportunity to then target that feedback. So my understanding is that I'm talking to everything from job seekers through to people who work in this field today. And for those of you that work in this field, targeted feedback, there's a lot of good work on that with respect to things such as using marketing models to help job seekers. I've got some references that I'll include as part of this presentation, Anybody that wants any of those, anyone that works in this field and is wanting that type of information, just get hold of me and I can send you those articles. So, what are some things that you can do today? I'm going to leave you with two. And I think what the other speakers were talking about in terms of resilience is hugely important. I'm not going to get into resilience. I want to add to your knowledge, not go over things that they have spoken about. And we had such a positive role model in the previous speaker with respect to resilience. So resilience is hugely important. But another important thing is your future self. What does your future self look like? Future selves are the representation that you have of yourself in the future. It's that vision that you have of who you are, what you want to be 5, 10 years from now. We're all at different stages in life, but we all have a vision of what our ideal might be. We also have feared for future selves. We have selves that we don't want to see realized. And motivation works in two ways. We have goals to achieve, and we have goals that we want to avoid. And so understanding what is your hoped for and your feared future selves are really important. And what I'd ask you to do is to spend some time thinking about that future self. The more that you can envisage it, the more that you can create a positive mental image that is very clear, the more you'll be able to create the steps to achieve that future self. But it takes time and it takes energy. You have to spend some time thinking about what that looks like and then work backwards. Go 5 years from now and work backwards. And that'll start to give you the steps that you need to create that future self. Likewise, try and create a future self that is feared. And I do this every year. I do this exact same thing for myself. What is my hoped for future self? What is my feared for future self? And what am I going to do over this year to ensure that my hoped for future self I get closer to, and my feared future self I move further away from? It's a basic goal-setting framework, but by creating a clear mental image of seeing yourself in that future, it's very powerful. The second thing that I want to leave you with as a technique, and I don't want to bombard you with techniques, but this is a concept that's very powerful with respect to adaptability. And it's this idea of a growth mindset. And some people have what's called a fixed mindset. So they believe that they're fixed, i.e. that they can't be changed, that they can't develop, that this is all that I can be. Other people have a growth mindset. And so when they get negative feedback or they have a challenge or something hits them, they see that as an opportunity for growth. So we have a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. These are things that you can look up on the internet. And the idea of a growth mindset seems to be the most predictive part of people's capacity to deal with the tough stuff. If you have a growth mindset, if you see all of the challenges as an opportunity to grow. For those of you that are interested in this, I've got a little handout. Just drop me an email and I'll send it off to you, which just gives you a little summary on growth mindsets. And there's a lot of stuff on the internet. But the key is understanding that nothing is fixed and that our capacity for growth is huge. That's exactly what we are as human beings. But we have to have a belief in that. So adopting a growth mindset as opposed to a fixed mindset is crucial. Now, what I wanted to do was to keep the talk inside the time frame that I was given. How much time have I got left? About 5 to 10 minutes. Perfect. So what I wanted to do was to then throw the floor open and take questions from you. As I say, I've worked in this field for a long time. If there are things that you wanted to ask in terms of particular techniques or things that you're challenged with, whether they be of the nature that I've spoken about or the job seeking behaviours or anything of that ilk, then I'm happy to take questions. I'm also happy not to take questions. Okay, so doesn't look like there's too many questions, which is fine. For those that work in the field, did they take off those other slides? So for those that work in the field and they want any of the references that I spoke about, please email me. My email was on the next slide, which doesn't appear to be there. But if you go to, there we go. Fantastic. For those that want any of those references, please feel free. I can send you those for those that are working in this particular field. And for those that want to get hold of me, if you go to that website, if you want something on the growth mindset, I can send that to you. More than happy to do that for those of you that are out there at the moment looking for work.
Thank you, Dr. Paul.